Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking edition of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Secrets of Influence series, where we are talking to business leaders all about influence. And if you haven't yet done so, my book, Secrets of Influence, is available now on Amazon.com. So if you want to get the whole context for this series, please go and head over there now while I correct this camera. And so with us in the hot seat today is none other than Peter Gudmundsson. He is the CEO of Be Home 24/7. Peter, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here, Matt. Thanks.
So why don't you quickly give us the elevator pitch, Peter? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there at Be Home 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. So we're Be Home 24/7 is a software company. We serve two markets, the vacation rental space and the residential real estate space, in particular, single family for rent. The software does three things. It controls smart devices like smart locks, thermostats, noise detectors, leak detectors, that sort of thing, and then links them to operating workflows. So like in the residential world, that means self-guided tours, maintenance management, vendor management, things like that. And then finally, combines those two first features with resident communications or guest communications. So the person who lives there knows what's going on with the building they live in.
Beautiful stuff. So let's get into the weeds here. So today we're talking about influence. So Peter, what does influence mean to you? Like if you were to define influence as a business leader and a CEO, how would you define it?
Well, it's the foundation and the substance of leadership. And so, in fact, when I hear you say influence, I have a flashback to my service in the U.S. Marines many years ago, where we learned the definition of leadership is the art of influencing. There's that word, the art of influencing men and women in such a way as to accomplish your mission. And so influence is really the substance of leadership.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was just wondering, you were obviously you were deployed as a Marine. I'm curious to understand and maybe bring to life a little bit more from a military perspective, a story or a personal story or experience where you were on the ground as a Marine, where you witnessed the power of influence in action, whether that was positive or negative.
Yeah, I mean, so sort of influence also implies there's active and there's sort of indirect. And so, for example, I was a field artillery officer and I was attached to an infantry company. And I was lucky. This is the late 80s or mid to late 80s when it was really sort of the end of the Cold War, which we were winning. And before the war on terror and some of the Middle Eastern activity that my brothers took part in. And so as an artillery officer, I was attached as a forward observer to an infantry company. So that meant that I was an advisor to the company commander, to a captain, but I was not in command. I had a small headquarters unit that I was in command of, but I had to influence him in terms of giving him good advice. You might not want to go that way. You might want to go this way, or very tactfully say, artillery folks are very proud of their land navigation skills. And this is before GPS was widespread. So very often I'd hear him on the radio calling in to his commander, the battalion commander, saying where we were, and I had to tap him on the shoulder and say, actually, we're about 300 meters to the right of that. We're not quite there, and 300 meters is a lot. It can be very important in military operations on the ground. So it's the art of it's tact. It is being accurate. It is being understanding emotional intelligence and context for information. But the military, especially at a young age, is just a great way to learn those types of skills and how to apply influence.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was saying this yesterday on another show, but I had Leif Babin on the show. He's a Navy SEAL, wrote the book Extreme Ownership with Jocko Willink. And I said to him, what is leadership actually about? And he said, it's about service. So, and it's quite interesting because if you think about influence in the context of leadership, I actually think most business leaders don't know what influence actually is. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like in the true sense of knowing how to move someone, get the best out of them, motivate them, inspire them, make a positive difference to the industry and markets that they're trying to serve. And so that's why I wanted to do this series. But what you said is bang on. It's all about service. And oftentimes I've found, especially young first-time entrepreneurs, and I'm guilty, when I was a youngster, I was a complete dictator. Do you know what I mean? I didn't know what leadership really was. and people were scared of my leadership style, and it was authoritarian. I mean, people felt like they grew more under that type of leadership style than they did, in other companies or other roles and things. But I learned as I started getting older, and I founded, 14 companies now and scaled a few, sold a couple, but also had a lot of failure. I kind of look back on all of that and go, actually, how much more of an impact would I have had if I learned and someone had just told me that, dude, it's, true leadership is about being of service, not having other people work for you. Do you know what I mean? It's you working with them to get the best out of them. And I just wish someone had told me that earlier.
Yeah, sometimes experience is the best teacher, though.
Mm-hmm. QBE, baby, qualified by experience.
Exactly.
So, Peter, quickly, when obviously we're talking about the relationship here between influence and its relationship to leadership. What qualities or behaviors do you think effective leaders possess when it comes to wielding influence within their teams and their communities?
Yeah, the top two I would pick are communication skills and empathy, or the ability to connect with people. And so it is drawing the parallels. How does the big picture mission break down into the pieces that make sense to members on the team? So it could be an abstraction, like a service, or it could be very, very concrete, like we're trying to achieve $1 million in sales this quarter. How are we going to do that? Well, how does that break down to each member of the team? Why should they care? And that's where the empathy comes in. So communication skills, so you can articulate context, mission, and the steps of execution, which you may direct, but you may also elicit out of the team, because they may have better ideas than you do because they're on the front line and they're seeing things every day. So in an abstract sense, I always come back to that communication, or articulation perhaps is a better word, and then also the empathy, the ability to connect.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself as a thought leader?
Yes. Try to be. And again, it doesn't mean a thought leader sometimes implies that you have all the answers. That's not it. I would argue that sometimes a thought leader is someone who has all the questions, or has a good series of questions, or asks the right questions, which again is that ability to connect the big picture to the small picture, or as they say, 30,000 feet view, but also down in the weeds. And the ability to go back and forth very rapidly is really important. And so, yeah, absolutely be a thought leader. And one of the things I like best about being a CEO is that ability to be the spokesperson, the primary spokesperson, but also the team leader in terms of articulating, asking the right questions, and helping position the business in concert with what the brand identity is. Not to sound too MBA-ish, but thought leadership is critical to that.
So how do you personally approach scaling your influence with thought leadership? Walk us through how you approach doing that particular job.
Yeah, well, the first thing is when you take the role. So I joined Be Home 24/7 about 3 years ago. I'm not the founder. I work with the CTO, who is the founder and the technical brain behind the operation. But a lot of it has to do with initially research, talking to people, researching the market, and understanding what it is that we do. Believe it or not, a lot of people can't really articulate for their organization what the purpose of the organization is. And it could even be something as simple as, say you run a restaurant. You could say, well, it's a restaurant. We feed people. Well, yes, on one level, that's true. On the other hand, it's a neighborhood diner where you are a social cohesion for a network or a community. And it's important that you understand that when you articulate the value. It's not just the eggs and bacon. It is the role that restaurant has in the community. And likewise, so it starts with research and understanding, and then defining what is, I use the word taxonomy, which again is kind of fancy, but what is the body of knowledge that we as a brand and therefore an organization should know all about? So in our case, because we do what we call a tailored operations platform for property technology, which again is kind of fancy, but we know everything you need to know about how to know what's happening in the four walls of your house, or whether it's a vacation house or a primary residence. We know how to organize that information, transmit it over distance, roll it up into dashboards and other tools that property managers can use. So we need to know all about that. And we don't have to know all about how to build a foundation of a house. That's not what we do. That's out of scope. But we do have to understand how housing is managed in various markets and how information flows make that effort more efficient.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I asked that question, and it's a standing one, because I think there's a very strong relationship to thought leadership and influence. And people don't understand what thought leadership is actually about. And I think you know more probably than the average guy or girl. And the reason for that is because in my book, I talk about this framework called the counter-narrative framework, which involves knowing what, in other words, if you're going to create influence, you need to know what the narrative is currently within a particular space. And so when you understand what that narrative is, you can paint a counter narrative. And the reason why counter narratives are so effective is because it gets you attention and credibility. And these things start to drive reputation, trust. And this is how you start to become an influencer in a particular space. And I also love what you said around being curious, being the guy who has the questions. And, asking the questions rather than trying to have all the answers, because this is why I do the show. It's because I want to be seen as the influencer of influencers. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Entirely. Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah. And that whole idea of narratives is very important. For example, I had a previous company before this one called Recruit Military, and we helped businesses recruit military veterans through career fairs, a job board, and a magazine. And I identified right away that there are the media only knows 4 narratives when it comes to veterans, 3 or 4. And it is, they're all screwed up. Who's going to give them a job? That's one. Quite counter to that. The other one is the community is coming together to support veterans. The other one is veterans are a hidden source of talent. And of course, we hyped on that third one in particular. But knowing those narratives, and sometimes they're just offensive stereotypes, but it's good to engage with those and provide a counter narrative. I love that phrase that you use.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested, I actually have a whole training module about this counter narrative framework on secretsofInfluence.com. But going back to this counter narrative idea, and I love the military example because I think it's actually true. I think also another counter narrative that I think is necessary is that an entrepreneur who fails in business, like where a business dies, is not worth backing as an investor. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
And if you just look at what people are saying and you look at industry reports, social media, what the commentary on Google Trends or whatever the case might be, you'll start to see very quickly that there are narratives everywhere. And the true influencer needs to understand what that narrative is so that they can shift it. And another key thing I would love to talk to you about is perceptions. Because the military example, how did you shift perceptions? What approach did you take to that?
Yeah, I think it depends what you're trying to shift, but basically it is knowing your stuff, being what's called technically and tactically competent, and then again through empathy, understanding where the other person is coming from, and so why do they have that perception? A classic example of the military is there are those that are very anti-military, that sort of post-Vietnam sort of stereotype of are you people all just sort of screaming drill instructors that manage only through authoritarian means, and you can shout back, but all you'll do is prove that that's what their stereotype is accurate. Instead, you can surprise them with a little verbal jiu-jitsu and understand, hey, why do you feel that way, and show some empathy and connect like a therapist. And before you know it, they're thinking, wow, I had the wrong idea about veterans as a class. So I'm going to modify my view. And therefore, you've been successful in altering that perception. But so it's listening. We're talking a lot about articulation and communication before, but the big part, the fundamental aspect of communication is listening, active listening, and then connecting.
What role does data or evidence play, from your perspective, in becoming or being able to influence?
Very much so. That goes back to tactical or competence that I mentioned earlier. You have to know the data. You also have to be careful, though, not to. It depends who you're talking to. I mean, if you're trying to influence a physicist, you might have lots and lots of data, lots of numbers. But data comes in other forms. Data can be verbal, and it can also be the ability to translate numbers into stories, into narrative that makes sense. That's what good politicians do. course, there aren't many good politicians, but
Say,
but
excuse
on
me,
any
who?
side of the spectrum. But the good ones can really articulate, can tell a story that people connect with, and I think that really helps the art of influence.
Mm-hmm. Peter, obviously, social media plays a big role in how much influence we're able to create. Podcasting, having your own show, um, books, things like this. These are all credibility signals that if someone was ever Googling Peter Gudmundsson, what would they find? And I'm curious to understand from your perspective, what, in terms of social media, how do you personally use social media to scale your influence?
Yeah, so social media. You're right. It's a great gift in many ways, but it creates a lot of noise and makes it harder to break through in other ways. And I would say social media is a great way I'm still a little bit believer in traditional media, articles, written articles, appearing on local or national news, that type of thing, and then using social media to expand that. I mean, some people think that even modern news broadcasts are almost all now chunked out into little 90-second clips that go out on social, and that's where they get most of their viewership. So anyway, so whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, I'm never going to get on TikTok. I'm sorry, it's too late for that. Or I'm not a Snapchatter. But for those other more traditional services, it is, again, what do you have to say? Figure out what you have to say and say it. And I do think that sometimes the downside, I'm not a big Twitter or X user, partially because I think 240 characters is just not enough to get across much. And whereas I think an article, a thought piece, I've written straight to LinkedIn sometimes, a piece about something, but know what you're talking about, address it very clearly, and get it out and hope it goes viral is an overused term, but hope it gets multiplied.
Peter, I kind of like to double click on the traditional media because I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. How do you get something written picked up by traditional media? Obviously, you've had success doing that. So curious to unpack that with you.
You pitch, you use, there are sources like Cision, used to be called Bacon's Information, a company, interestingly, I bought about 20 years ago in another setting. But Cision is a database of journalists. Figure out what beat the journalist has. So you'd be amazed how you can find either a freelance or a staff writer who is very interested in the same topics you are. And you pitch them on a story, not, hey, I want to get the word out about Be Home 24/7. No one's going to do that. That's called, they're going to refer you to the advertising department. But instead you say, hey, do you know that changes in property management technology are having this sort of impact on people's vacations? And you pitch that story in April because in May, stories are coming out about summer vacations and so on. So you think like a journalist, because a journalist, they get inquiries all the time, but most of them are not that well thought out. So to really think, again, you said it earlier, narrative is so important. What are the either reinforce the prevailing narrative or offer a counter narrative. I mean, for example, as we're recording this, there's tension in the Middle East. There's war in the Middle East. It might be that, I'm making this up for illustration, but it might be that Cyprus or Turkey is a great place to go on vacation right now. It's not in the war that's going on, and it might be that they're bargains. So you pitch Travel and Leisure magazine on the idea that travel to Cyprus or Turkey it could never have been cheaper and better than it is today. Again, I totally made that up. I don't know if that's true at all, but a travel journalist will. And so knowing the narratives, being aware of what's going on, it's amazing how one of the best PR coups I ever had or was involved with was way back in the 90s when Dole was running against Clinton, and my company, my corporation owned Dog Fancy and Cat Magazine, and they pitched the idea of having a debate on whether there should be a cat or a dog in the White House, because Clinton famously had a cat named Socks and Dole had some sort of golden retriever. And anyway, people loved it. It was picked up all over because of that's, everyone loves that. People are dog people or cat people, and they're tired of talking about real politics. But it's kind of a fun thing, and New York Times, Wall Street Journal, everyone picked it up. So and got those magazines promoted as a result. So anyway, big believer in pitching that. Unfortunately, journalistic resources are fading as local newspapers die and so on. But there's still a lot of people looking for original content that fits or challenges existing narratives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You know what I've observed, Peter, is that people abuse the traditional press release. Like they don't actually know how to work with that. And I write about this in my book. I write about a number of things that actually historically were really amazing tools, right? Or strategies or tactics to raise your profile or scale your influence. But people now today, if you think about the traditional press release that goes out, what do you see? You see them talking about themselves. You know, it's like we've just launched this new product that does this and it's super ding dong. And here's a quote from the CEO. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And no one fucking cares.
No.
No one cares about that
No.
type of press release. And those examples that you were sharing is what it's kind of like, is it newsworthy? Is it really a counter narrative? Is it something that's truly different? And I think we need to completely rethink things like the traditional press release. Like, how do you actually use that as part of a broader like a strategy, rather like a broader strategy, like a press release and what? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think the press release is largely just a digital record at this point. It's like you could look it up and on that date they launched that product. But that person, to even find that, has to already be interested, which means you've pitched them on something more substantive than a flat press release. Yeah, press releases. It's from the Mad Men era, I think today.
Yeah, exactly. What are your thoughts on traditional PR as a discipline to scale influence?
Yeah, in my experience in my career, which is now about my civilian career is about 35 years long, I'm very skeptical of agencies because usually it's a slick partner who sells you the account. You end up paying a retainer, and you get a 23-year-old who is overworked and underpaid. And so I think you have to do it yourself. You can get help from your marketing department inside your company, but I think you the CEO should really be pitching the stories directly. That's my general opinion. That said, there are some agencies, if they're truly niches, rather than go with the brand names that have sort of nationally or internationally famous. There's an exception for like disaster response PR and some other specialties, but for routine story placement, I think I would go either do it yourself or get a freelancer or someone who really knows your space who can help pitch the story.
Yeah, I get pitched a lot by PR agents, as you can imagine. This person, has written a book, and what we want to. Here's what you can ask them, and they give you the questions, all this kind of stuff. And podcast booking agencies are also very guilty of this whole sort of system, if you like. But people always like, it actually upsets me a little bit because you spend a decade building a platform, and then they want to come on for free.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's disrespectful. And I think traditional PR firms, podcast booking agencies, they actually don't know how to deal with a platform owner like myself and many, many others. Mm-hmm. And so when they pitch me, it's kind of like, well, what are you doing? You just want me to promote your stuff. You're hiring, you want everything for free and da 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 da. So right. Why would I do that? And so this is again, it's influence. I think if you had an astute podcast booking agent who approached me and said, Matthew, we will pay you $500 or $1,000 or do something, right? Whereas I'm actually going to, over and above giving you my time to talk about my book, I'd also like to do this. I'd like to give away 10 copies of my book. I'd like to pay you some money. I'd like to, introduce you to 10 CEOs in my network. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
That's how you get attention. That's how you start to drive influence with a media owner, a platform owner. Because and it's like a cultural thing. It's like, why do you expect everything for free? And I do believe that it's because a startup founder or a business owner, entrepreneur, they hire these PR people because that's the only cost that they're prepared to depart with. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so and I can tell you now, every single CEO I know, and if they hire a PR firm, they're not around for longer than like 3 to 6 months because they run out of things to do. So then PR has a bad reputation and. And I think it needs to change.
Yeah, I agree. And that comes down to the quality of pitches too, because if you're just constantly spamming, that's not good. You really have to be thoughtful. What do I have to say, and who needs to hear it, and how does that add value to them, uh, both the medium you're going through and the ultimate audience? And so few people do that.
By the way, it goes both ways. So, as a media owner, platform owner, and maybe we could use you as an example. When I reached out to you, what made you say yes?
Um, Intellectual curiosity, is a big thing. I was interested. I mean, leadership is of course one of the great forces of my life. So I'm very interested in it, and it's one of these things you never quite master. It's like what's that line in calculus? You approach it, but you never quite get there. So I had the opportunity to learn. This was less more of a curiosity thing more than anything else. But you also never know. Life is an interesting journey. You meet people along the way that you can help, and sometimes they help you back. But usually, you give more than you receive.
Well, this is it, right? So, one last question, and then we'll wrap up. Peter, are you an author? Have you written a book?
I have. Yeah, I've self-published two different books. One was called the Veteran Hiring Leaders Handbook. It was called, and it was designed for HR leaders who had been assigned the task of hiring more veterans. That's when I bought this company, Recruit Military. I found there were a lot of HR leaders that typically women, not always, but some women who came up through other parts of HR and they knew nothing about the military, and they had been tasked by their CEO to hire more veterans. And so this was a guide, a how-to guide to do that. And before that, I had actually a failed startup in the space of personal history, the idea of helping older people preserve their life stories. And I wrote a handbook also on Your Priceless Legacy, a story that must be told. I still give out copies of it because people do come across that, hey, my grandmother's getting older. How can we get her story down? And that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I've written a novel for middle school aged kids that I'm about 90% done with. I want to do a series in my spare time there. So yeah, writing helps influence. It helps build a brand, a personal brand, but it also helps clarify thinking. It's one of the best ways to organize thoughts is writing.
Yeah, if you want to master something, teach it.
There you go. Exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Peter, love your story. Love what you're doing. Congrats on all your success. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Likewise. Thank
Cheers,
you.
everybody else. We'll see you again soon. Ciao for now.